Picture this: a bridge older than empires, older than history books, standing unshaken as centuries of storms, wars, and earthquakes rage around it. No steel, no concrete, just stone and timber arranged with such precision that modern engineers scratch their heads in disbelief. How did ancient builders, armed with nothing but chisels and intuition, create structures that outlast civilizations? That's the mystery we're unraveling today in the secret science of load-bearing in pre-Iron Age bridges that have never collapsed. These bridges aren't just relics, they're masterclasses in resilience, whispering secrets of a forgotten genius. Think about the bridges you cross every day: sleek, modern, reinforced with alloys and algorithms. Yet how many will still be standing in 100 years? Now look at the Arcadico Bridge in Greece, built over 3,000 years ago. Its limestone slabs still bear weight today, defying time with a quiet arrogance. What did these ancient engineers know that we've overlooked? Was it magic, divine intervention? No, it was something far more powerful: an intimate dance with physics, materials, and the land itself. They didn't fight nature, they listened to it, and in that harmony, they built the impossible. This video is a journey into that hidden wisdom. We'll walk the same stones Roman legionnaires marched across, trace the grooves of Inca masons who cut rocks so precisely they locked together like a puzzle, and decode the geometric secrets of bridges that shrug off earthquakes like minor inconveniences. You'll discover why some ancient mortar-free designs are more stable than modern glued constructions, how a handful of grass woven into rope can outlast steel cables, and why the humble arch became humanity's most enduring architectural cheat code. These bridges weren't just built, they were sung into existence with knowledge passed down through chants and rituals. So, if you've ever wondered how the past could teach the future a thing or two about resilience, stick around. By the end, you'll see every stone, every river, every ancient blueprint with new eyes, because some secrets aren't meant to stay buried. Pre-Iron Age bridges represent a fascinating chapter in human ingenuity, built during an era when metal tools were rare or non-existent. Without the advantage of iron or steel, ancient engineers turned to what nature provided: stone, timber, and organic materials like plant fibers and animal-derived binders. The absence of modern technology didn't limit their ambition. Instead, it forced them to think creatively about how to manipulate these raw elements into structures that could withstand the test of time. Take the Inca rope bridges of Peru, for instance. Woven from tough grasses and anchored to stone pylons, these suspension bridges swayed high above treacherous river gorges, connecting distant parts of an empire that spanned mountains. On the other side of the world, the Mycenaeans of Greece stacked massive limestone slabs into corbelled arches, creating bridges that distributed weight so efficiently they still stand today, millennia later. What's remarkable is how these bridges weren't just functional, they were tailored to their environments. In regions prone to earthquakes like the Himalayas, builders used flexible wooden joints that could absorb seismic shocks. In flood-prone areas such as the river valleys of ancient China, bridges were raised on high piers to avoid being swept away by seasonal rains. Every design choice reflected a deep understanding of local conditions, proving that these engineers didn't just build bridges, they collaborated with the landscape. The diversity of these structures is staggering. From the stone slab bridges of Cornwall, designed to let floodwaters pass beneath them, to the floating log roads of Ireland's bogs, which distributed weight across unstable terrain, each culture developed solutions unique to its challenges. Even the materials varied dramatically. While the Romans mixed volcanic ash into their mortar to create a waterproof concrete, the builders of Japan's oldest bridges relied on interlocking timber frames that flexed rather than cracked under stress. What unites all these bridges is their reliance on geometry and physics rather than brute strength. Without metal reinforcements, their stability came from precise angles, carefully calculated curves, and the natural properties of their materials. A well-placed keystone in an arch could redirect immense weight into the ground, while a tightly woven rope bridge could endure tension far beyond what its individual fibers could handle alone. These weren't just structures, they were equations carved in stone and wood, solving problems that still challenge engineers today. Perhaps the most surprising revelation is how many of these bridges remain in use. The Arcadico bridge in Greece, built around 1300 BCE, still supports the occasional pedestrian, while the caravan bridge in Turkey has borne the weight of countless travelers since the 9th century BC. Their endurance forces us to rethink what we label as primitive. These bridges weren't crude prototypes, they were the pinnacle of pre-industrial engineering, honed through generations of trial, error, and observation. The scope of pre-Iron Age bridge building stretches far beyond mere construction. These bridges were lifelines of trade, religion, and cultural exchange. The Jeju Bridge in China facilitated commerce along the Silk Road, while the sacred causeways of the Maya connected temples and cities in a network of spiritual and political significance. Each bridge tells a story not just of engineering, but of the societies that built them, their priorities, their challenges, and their unshakable determination to connect. Ancient builders didn't have the luxury of ordering steel beams or high-strength concrete. They worked with what the land gave them. And yet, their choice of materials wasn't just random. It was a masterclass in resourcefulness. Take granite, for instance. This dense, crystalline rock resists crushing forces better than almost any natural material, which is why civilizations from Egypt to India used it for bridge piers and abutments. But granite wasn't just strong, it was weatherproof. Unlike softer stones that crumble under rain and wind, granite shrugs off erosion like it's nothing. That's why bridges like the ones in Mycenaean Greece, built with rough-hewn limestone and granite blocks, still stand today, their surfaces barely worn after 3,000 years. Then there's the Roman obsession with volcanic ash. When mixed with lime and water, pozzolana ash created a mortar that didn't just harden, it got stronger underwater. This was no happy accident. Roman engineers noticed that structures near volcanoes lasted longer, and they reverse-engineered the reason. Chemical reactions between the ash and seawater formed a rock-like binder. The result, bridges like the Pons Fabricius, whose mortar joints are tougher now than when they were first laid. Compare that to modern concrete, which cracks and spalls after decades, and you start to wonder who the real innovators were. But the Romans weren't the only ones playing chemistry with their mortar. Over in China, builders stumbled upon an even more unexpected ingredient: sticky rice. By mixing glutinous rice soup with slaked lime, they created a mortar so adhesive that it bonded stones for centuries. Tests on ancient Chinese bridges show that this organic composite isn't just durable, it's self-healing. Tiny cracks absorb moisture, which reactivates the rice compounds, sealing gaps over time. It's a trick modern scientists are only now starting to replicate with synthetic polymers. Wood, too, was more than just lumber. Certain hardwoods, like oak and teak, contain natural oils that repel insects and resist rot. The Japanese understood this intimately. Their timber bridges, like the Kintai-Kyo, used kiyaki wood for its resistance to humidity and termites. But here's the twist: they didn't just cut and assemble. They seasoned the wood for years, allowing it to stabilize naturally, and designed joints that expanded and contracted with the seasons. This wasn't just construction, it was a dialogue with time itself. Material selection also dictated design in ways that seem counterintuitive today. In earthquake-prone regions, builders intentionally chose slightly porous stones. Why? Because under seismic stress, tiny fractures in the rock absorbed energy, preventing catastrophic failure. Bridges in the Andes, for example, used sandstone blocks that would microfracture during tremors, then settle back into place. Modern engineers call this ductile behavior, but ancient builders achieved it without a single physics textbook, just centuries of observing how materials behaved under pressure. Even the humblest materials had hidden strengths. Take the grass ropes of the Inca. Made from iku grass, these cables were weaker than steel in raw tension, but their flexibility was their superpower. When winds whipped through mountain passes, the bridges swayed instead of snapping. And because the ropes were replaceable, communities could renew them annually in a ritual that doubled as structural maintenance. Compare that to a modern suspension bridge where a single corroded cable can spell disaster. The lesson here isn't just that ancient materials were good, it's that they were chosen for how they interacted with their environment. Roman pozzolana mortar thrived in wet conditions. Chinese rice mortar excelled in humid climates. Inca grass ropes conquered high-altitude winds. These builders didn't just pick materials for strength, they picked them for symbiosis. That's why their bridges didn't just last, they became part of the landscape, as enduring as the rivers they crossed. The true genius of ancient bridges lies not in the stones themselves, but in the invisible dance of forces they orchestrated. Picture an arch, that simple, elegant curve, doing something miraculous. Every time weight presses down on it, the stones don't just resist, they transform that pressure into sideways thrust, pushing outward against their neighbors. But here's the magic: the heavier the load, the tighter the arch grips itself. The Arcadico bridge in Greece demonstrates this perfectly. Its corbelled arch, built without mortar, uses gravity as an ally. Each limestone slab leans slightly inward, so when a cart or traveler crosses, the weight drives the stones deeper into their locked positions. It's like a handshake that strengthens the harder you squeeze. Now shift your gaze to Japan, where slab and post bridges took a different approach. Instead of arches, they used trapezoidal bases, wider at the bottom, narrower at the top. This shape acts like a funnel for forces, channeling weight diagonally down into the earth. The result, a bridge that doesn't just stand on the ground but becomes part of it. Modern engineers call this load dispersion, but ancient builders understood it as intuition. They observed how tree roots spread underground or how mountains tapered at their peaks, then mimicked those shapes in wood and stone. What's fascinating is how these geometric solutions emerged independently across cultures. The Romans perfected the semicircular arch, while the Maya used pointed arches that directed weight even more efficiently. In Nepal, cantilevered bridges extended like outstretched arms, each beam counterbalancing the next. These weren't coincidences, they were universal responses to universal laws of physics. Without shared blueprints or communication, builders from Greece to the Andes arrived at similar conclusions. Curves distribute, angles redirect, and triangles stabilize. The secret sauce wasn't just in choosing the right shape, but in tweaking it for context. Take the Incas' rope bridges, their catenary curve. The natural dip of a hanging chain wasn't just for looks. That curve ensured that tension spread evenly across every fiber of grass, preventing any single strand from snapping under strain. Meanwhile, in dry climates, flat stone slabs sufficed because without water to erode their bases, sheer mass was enough. But in flood-prone regions, arches rose higher, letting water rush beneath rather than against the structure. Perhaps the most brilliant example of shape solving lies in the keystone, the wedge-shaped block at an arch's crown. Remove it and the whole structure collapses, but in place, it's the linchpin that converts downward force into lateral stability. The Romans didn't invent the keystone, but they mastered its proportions, calculating exact angles that turned vulnerability into invincibility. Some medieval bridges failed because their keystones were too shallow. Roman ones endured because their geometry was precise. This wasn't just trial and error, it was trial, error, and meticulous observation. When an early corbel bridge collapsed, builders noticed which stones shifted first. When a cantilever groaned under load, they saw where it bowed. Over generations, this accumulated wisdom hardened into rules of thumb. Arches should rise at least 1/3 of their span. Trapezoidal bases needed a 2-to-1 slope, and cantilevers required counterweights equal to half the projected load. These weren't written down, they were etched into muscle memory, passed from master to apprentice like sacred lore. Today, we'd use computer models to simulate these forces. Ancient engineers used shadows. At noon, they'd trace the shadow of a standing stone to gauge angles. At sunset, they'd watch how light filtered through gaps to check alignments. Geometry wasn't abstract, it was woven into their daily dialogue with the physical world. When the Mycenaeans stacked those limestone slabs into the Arcadico bridge, they weren't just piling rocks, they were composing a silent symphony of stress and counterstress, where every note had to be perfect. The lesson here transcends bridges. It's about rethinking how we approach problems today. Modern engineering often relies on overpowering challenges with stronger materials, more steel, more concrete. But these ancient builders asked a different question. How can we arrange what we have so that forces work for us, not against us? Their bridges didn't conquer nature, they conversed with it, turning constraints into collaborators. That's why, after millennia, their stone whispers still echo across the ages, not as ruins, but as masterpieces. Some of the most enduring bridges in history were built without a single drop of adhesive holding them together. Instead of relying on mortar or cement, ancient engineers mastered the art of dry stone construction, a technique where precisely carved blocks locked together through sheer geometry and gravity. The Inca were undisputed masters of this method. Their ashlar masonry involved stones cut with such exacting precision that a knife blade couldn't slip between the joints. Each block was shaped to fit its neighbor like pieces of a three-dimensional puzzle, with interlocking protrusions and indentations that created a self-stabilizing system. What makes this even more astonishing is how these mortar-free designs outperform modern construction in earthquake zones. When tremors strike, rigid modern structures with inflexible adhesives often crack under the stress. But Inca bridges and walls have a secret weapon: micro-movements. Those perfectly fitted stones can shift slightly during seismic activity, absorbing and redistributing the energy, then settling back into place once the shaking stops. It's a principle modern engineers now call elastic response, but the Inca achieved it centuries ago simply by understanding how stones interact under pressure. The process behind this precision remains shrouded in mystery. Without advanced measuring tools, how did craftsmen achieve such flawless fits? Some scholars suggest they used a system of string measurements and shadow angles to calculate dimensions. Others point to the possibility of trial and error fitting, where stones were painstakingly adjusted until they clicked into place. Then there's the intriguing theory that certain cultures, like the Inca, may have employed sonic techniques, tapping stones to listen for resonant frequencies that indicated perfect alignment. Beyond functionality, this mortar-free approach had unexpected benefits. Without organic binders that degrade over time, these structures avoided the slow decay that plagues mortared joints. The Pont du Gard aqueduct in France stands as proof. While medieval additions with mortar have crumbled, the original Roman dry stone sections remain pristine. Even environmental factors worked in their favor. In freezing climates, the absence of mortar meant no water could seep in, freeze, and expand to crack the stones. These builders didn't just create bridges, they engineered them to evolve with their surroundings. Perhaps the most poetic aspect is how these structures embody a philosophy of balance rather than domination. Modern construction often relies on forcing materials into submission with bolts and welds. Ancient dry stone bridges represent a conversation, a compromise between human intention and natural forces. The stones aren't glued in place, they're persuaded to stay through mutual tension. That's why, after thousands of years, they still stand, not because they defy nature, but because they found a way to dance with it. Water has always been both a bridge's greatest ally and its most relentless enemy. Ancient engineers knew this intimately. They didn't just build over rivers, they danced with them, designing structures that anticipated every trick currents might play. Take Rome's Pons Fabricius, for instance. Beneath its arches, you'll find smaller secondary openings, flood arches, that seem decorative at first glance, but these were anything but ornamental. When the Tiber River swelled during storms, these arches acted as pressure valves, letting torrents pass through rather than battering the bridge's main supports. It's a concept modern engineers call relief capacity, but the Romans implemented it 2,000 years ago without hydrology textbooks or supercomputers. Meanwhile, halfway across the ancient world, the builders of Turkey's Caravan Bridge took a different approach. Instead of fighting the current, they redirected it. The entire bridge leans subtly upstream, like a stubborn tree rooted against the wind. This slight angle forces water to glance off the piers rather than hitting them head-on, reducing erosion at the foundations. Today, we'd use reinforced concrete to withstand such forces, but these engineers achieved the same result with nothing more than clever geometry and a deep understanding of flow dynamics. Some bridges didn't just resist water, they invited it in. In ancient Sri Lanka, engineers carved intricate drainage channels directly into the stone decks of their bridges. These weren't afterthoughts, they were integral to the design, ensuring that monsoon rains never pooled on the surface to freeze or weaken the structure. Even more impressive were the scour holes built into the bases of Chinese bridges during the Tang dynasty. These carefully placed cavities created controlled vortices in the water, intentionally drawing sediment away from critical areas to prevent buildup that could destabilize the piers. Then there were the bridges that elevated themselves out of harm's way entirely. The Maya Sakbiob raised stone causeways of the Yucatan weren't just status symbols. Their elevated design kept them dry during seasonal floods, while the crushed limestone surfaces allowed rainwater to percolate downward rather than washing away the foundation. Similarly, the ancient Persians built their bridges with hollow abutments filled with loose rubble. When floodwaters surged, these chambers acted like shock absorbers, letting water seep in and dissipate energy rather than battering the solid masonry. Perhaps the most ingenious water management strategy of all was invisibility. The clapper bridges of Dartmoor in England sit so low to the water that they're often submerged during floods. At first glance, this seems like a flaw until you realize the genius behind it. When the river rises, the water flows smoothly over the flat stones with minimal resistance, eliminating the destructive turbulence that topples taller structures. Once the flood recedes, the bridge emerges unscathed, its simplicity its salvation. These adaptations reveal a pattern. ancient engineers didn't just build stronger, they built smarter. They observed how water moved, where it accelerated, where it eddied, where it deposited silt, and tailored each bridge to its specific stretch of river. Some redirected flow, others absorbed it, and a few even embraced temporary submersion as a survival tactic. What unites them all is a philosophy modern infrastructure often forgets. Sometimes the best way to withstand nature's power isn't to resist it, but to outthink it. The proof lies in the silence of these ancient structures. While modern bridges groan under floodwaters with steel reinforcements straining, their prehistoric counterparts stand quiet, their stones whispering secrets of a time when engineering wasn't about brute force, but about harmony. The next time you cross a river, look down, you might just see the ghost of that wisdom reflected in the water. Mountains didn't just challenge ancient bridge builders, they sculpted their ingenuity. In the rugged Himalayas, where gorges plunged thousands of feet, engineers devised cantilevered spans that seemed to defy logic. Trees were felled so their trunks extended horizontally from cliff faces, weighted down by rocks until another trunk could reach out from the opposite side, fingertips of timber gradually stitching the void together. The Chenab Bridge in ancient India took this further, its foundations chiseled directly into bedrock, becoming one with the mountain itself. These weren't structures placed upon the land, they were extensions of it, growing from the stone like natural formations. But descend from those dizzying heights to the spongy marshlands of Ireland, and you'll find an entirely different kind of brilliance. Here, where the ground couldn't support solid footings, builders wattle-wove brushwood and saplings into floating mats that distributed weight like snowshoes. These bog bridges didn't resist the soft earth, they embraced its fluidity, flexing with the terrain rather than fighting it. Some were even designed to rise and fall with seasonal water levels, their buoyancy turning a potential weakness into an asset. The contrast between these two approaches reveals a universal truth. Pre-Iron Age engineers were master adapters. In the Andes, suspension bridges made of iku grass swayed like living things, their flexibility perfect for earthquake zones. Meanwhile, in the deserts of Persia, arches were built low and wide to withstand scouring winds, their profiles mirroring the dunes around them. Every design choice was a response to whispered clues from the environment. The way frost heaved stones in winter, how monsoon rains carved new channels each summer. Perhaps the most striking example of terrain-shaping design comes from the cliffside bridges of ancient China. Along the Yangtze River, builders anchored structures to natural rock pillars, using the river's own erosional sculptures as supports. In Cappadocia, they tunneled through soft volcanic tuff to create bridges that were half architecture, half geology. These weren't just feats of engineering, they were collaborations with the planet, a dialogue between human need and earthly reality. What modern blueprints call site-specific challenges, ancient builders saw as invitations to innovate. The floating bridges of Mesopotamia used inflated animal skins for buoyancy, while the stepped causeways of Mesoamerica doubled as flood barriers during rainy seasons. No two bridges were alike because no two landscapes were identical. This bespoke approach, this deep listening to the land, is why so many of these structures still stand today. They weren't imposed upon their environments, they emerged from them, as natural as the rivers they crossed and the mountains they clung to. The lesson for our era is profound. Today, we often try to bend nature to our will with steel and concrete, forcing standardized designs onto uneven terrain. These ancient builders remind us that true resilience comes not from domination, but from adaptation, not from conquering the landscape, but from conversing with it. Their bridges whisper that the land isn't an obstacle to overcome. It's the wisest teacher we'll ever have. Stories swirl around ancient bridges like mist over the rivers they cross, tales of secret metal reinforcements, divine blessings, even whispered legends of alchemical mortars mixed with dragon bones. But when archaeologists put these myths to the test, the truth proves even more extraordinary. Take the Pont du Gard, that triple-tiered Roman marvel stretching across the Garden River. For years, locals swore its limestone blocks must conceal iron rods. How else could it stand for 2 millennia? Yet spectrographic scans reveal nothing but stone meeting stone, each block meticulously shaped to transfer weight to its neighbor through friction alone. The real magic wasn't hidden metal, it was the Romans' obsessive precision, cutting joints so tight a blade of grass couldn't slip between them. Then there's the myth of the floating keystone, a fable told about bridges from India to Ireland, claiming a single stone was suspended mid-air by divine will. The reality of physics, the keystone at the apex of an arch isn't held by magic, it's locked in place by the inward pressure of the voussoirs flanking it. Remove one side and the whole structure collapses. This isn't mysticism, it's mechanical genius. The ancient Greeks took this further with dowel joints, carving protrusions on one stone that fit into hollows on another, like a 3-dimensional puzzle. At the Arcadico bridge, these tongue and groove fittings are invisible to the eye but detectable by touch, ensuring each slab couldn't shift even a hair's breadth. Perhaps the most persistent legend involves sound-built bridges, where masons supposedly tuned stones to harmonic frequencies, making them indestructible. While no evidence supports literal musical construction, there's a kernel of truth here. Builders did listen, not to notes but to the whispers of materials. Tapping stones revealed hidden fractures. The dull thud of a mallet on wood indicated rot. This sensory knowledge was as vital as any blueprint. Modern tools have debunked other tall tales too. X-ray fluorescence scans of China's Jeju Bridge found no trace of the mythical, unmelting ice mortar said to bind its stones. Instead, we see clever use of dovetail clamps, ironwood pegs that swell when wet, tightening the structure over time. Similarly, the blood-strengthened bridges of the Aztecs. No human sacrifices here, just iron-rich clay deposits that oxidize to a rusty red, resembling dried blood. What these myths reveal is our own disbelief that mere humans could engineer such longevity. We'd rather credit gods or aliens than admit that patience and observation could yield perfection. But the stones themselves tell a different story, one of calloused hands and quiet calculation, where every chip of the chisel was a conversation between craftsman and material. The real enchantment lies not in magic, but in mastery so profound it borders on the miraculous. Imagine constructing a bridge that must last centuries without writing down a single measurement or diagram. That's exactly what ancient cultures achieved by turning engineering into an oral art form. Among the Maori of New Zealand, the secrets of building suspension bridges from native flax ropes weren't recorded in manuals, they were woven into rhythmic chants. These weren't just songs, they were living textbooks where every verse held clues about fiber tension, anchor spacing, and the sacred timing for harvesting materials. A single chant might encode generations of trial and error, distilled into melodies that apprentices memorized like sacred hymns. This reliance on oral tradition wasn't unique to the Maori. In West Africa, the Dogon people transmitted the geometry of their log bridges through storytelling, using allegories about the cosmos to explain load distribution. A tale about the stars aligning might secretly teach how to position supports along a riverbank. Meanwhile, in the Andes, Inca engineers trained their successors with knotted quipu cords, a tactile memory aid where each knot's placement and tightness represented structural ratios. These weren't primitive methods, they were sophisticated mnemonic systems, engineered to survive where parchment might rot or burn. The real brilliance lay in how these traditions embedded physics into daily life. Timber seasoning, for instance, wasn't a technical manual but a seasonal rhythm. Certain Polynesian cultures taught that bridge timbers should be cut only during the waning moon, when sap flow minimized insect attraction. Modern science confirms this wisdom. Lower moisture content during this lunar phase does indeed reduce rot. Similarly, load testing rituals often doubled as community festivals. In medieval Armenia, villagers would gather to dance on newly built bridges, not just to celebrate but to stress test the structure through synchronized movement. The vibrations revealed weaknesses before the bridge saw regular use. What's astonishing is how accurately these oral techniques preserved knowledge across centuries. When European colonizers first encountered the 500-year-old Queshuachoca rope bridge in Peru, they assumed its annual rebuilding was crude guesswork, but the Andean communities maintaining it followed precise verbal protocols, specific weaving patterns recited in Quechua, handed down since Inca times. Modern engineers comparing these instructions to computer models found the oral formulas matched optimal tension calculations almost exactly. This raises a profound question. Did oral traditions actually surpass written manuals in some ways? A master builder correcting an apprentice's chant in real time ensured no step was misremembered. Rituals like the Maori's tapu system declaring bridges sacred during construction prevented shortcuts that might compromise integrity. Unlike static parchment, oral knowledge evolved subtly with each generation, incorporating new insights while preserving core principles. The loss of these traditions today is more than cultural erosion. It's a disappearance of alternative ways to think about engineering. We've digitized blueprints into 3D models, yet struggle to replicate the earthquake resilience of Inca bridges built without a single sketch. Perhaps the deepest lesson isn't about ropes or stones, but about how humans once held entire cathedrals of knowledge in their minds, singing bridges into existence one carefully remembered note at a time. Standing quietly in the Greek Peloponnese, the Arcadico bridge doesn't just defy time, it mocks it. Built around 1300 BC, this Mycenaean marvel looks almost deceptively simple. Rough limestone slabs stacked without mortar, forming a corbelled arch over what was once a strategic military route. But lean closer and the genius reveals itself. Each stone was carefully selected not for its beauty, but for its imperfections, natural ridges and uneven surfaces that create friction, locking the blocks together like three-dimensional puzzle pieces. The bridge's roadway slopes slightly inward, a subtle taper that turns gravity into an ally. Every footstep, every cartwheel drives the stones deeper into their embrace, tightening the structure with the passing centuries. What's most striking isn't just its endurance, but its foresight. The builders chose a dry gully for its location, not because it was convenient, but because they understood geology. Unlike river crossings vulnerable to erosion, this spot minimized water damage while still connecting vital pathways. The bridge's width tells another story, nearly 4 meters at the base, narrowing to 2.5 meters at the top. This trapezoidal profile isn't an aesthetic choice. It's a calculated dispersion of stress, funneling weight diagonally into the earth like roots spreading underground. Modern laser scans reveal something even more astonishing. The stones aren't uniform. Their varying thicknesses create a natural flexibility, allowing microscopic shifts during earthquakes that would shatter rigid modern designs. Yet for all we've decoded, mysteries linger. How did builders transport multi-ton limestone blocks without wheels or pulleys? Why does the bridge align precisely with solstice shadows, suggesting celestial calibration? And most perplexing of all, why does this primitive structure outperform contemporary bridges in stress tests? When engineers recently modeled the Arcadico bridge using finite element analysis, they found its load distribution rivals that of 21st century designs. The secret lies in its imperfections, the slight asymmetries and organic shapes that distribute forces unpredictably, avoiding concentrated stress points. The bridge's longevity also hints at a social dimension. Unlike Roman monuments built by armies of slaves, the Arcadico shows signs of communal care. Where patterns suggest generations of locals maintained its surface, filling gaps with smaller stones as needed. This wasn't just infrastructure, it was a shared inheritance tended like a living thing. Today, as modern engineers puzzle over its resilience, the bridge whispers a radical idea. Perhaps durability isn't about stronger materials, but about designing structures that invite care, adapt to change, and respect the land they're rooted in. The Arcadico doesn't just stand, it listens, and 3,000 years later, we're only beginning to hear its lessons. Every masterpiece of ancient engineering stands atop a hidden mountain of failures, collapses that whispered crucial lessons to those who listened. Along the Tiber River, just downstream from Rome's enduring Ponte Milvio, archaeologists have uncovered the skeletal remains of earlier bridges that didn't survive. These ruins aren't just debris, they're a palimpsest of progress, each crumbled arch and fractured pier telling a story of adjustment. One early attempt used piers spaced too far apart, buckling under the river's current. The solution: later builders narrowed the spans and thickened the abutments, redistributing the load more evenly. But they didn't stop there. They observed how floodwaters carved around the piers, so they added star-shaped breakwaters, a design tweak so effective it's still used in modern hydraulic engineering. This iterative process wasn't unique to Rome. In ancient China, the remains of a Tang dynasty bridge near the Yellow River show a fascinating evolution. The first version used straight, rigid decks that shattered during earthquakes. The next iteration introduced slight upward curves at the ends, allowing the structure to flex during tremors. By the third attempt, builders had incorporated hinge-like joints that let the bridge sway without breaking, an innovation born from observing how bamboo bent in the wind. These weren't random experiments, they were systematic refinements, each failure methodically analyzed and addressed. What's remarkable is how these ancient engineers documented their lessons without pen or parchment. In Peru, the Inca left clues in their construction rituals. After a suspension bridge collapsed near Huancaire, chroniclers recorded that priests began burying coca leaves beneath new anchor stones, not just as an offering, but because they'd noticed the leaves' slight elasticity helped absorb vibrations. Similarly, medieval European masons developed a tradition of carving tiny faces into stones that cracked under stress, a visual record of weak points to avoid in future builds. Parallels to modern engineering are striking. Today's researchers use computer models to simulate stress points. Ancient builders used scaled-down prototypes made of clay or woven reeds. The Maya, for instance, constructed miniature causeways in sandboxes, loading them until they failed to identify weak spots. The Assyrians went further, intentionally overloading new bridges with livestock and building materials before public use, a literal stress test that mirrored modern certification processes. Perhaps the most profound lesson lies in how these cultures institutionalized failure. Unlike contemporary societies that often stigmatize mistakes, ancient engineers treated collapses as inevitable milestones. The Japanese even celebrated them through kintsugi bridge festivals, where broken timbers were repaired with gold-laced lacquer, visibly honoring the structure's history of adaptation. This philosophy, that each crack held wisdom, may explain why some pre-Iron Age bridges outlasted their modern counterparts. They weren't built to be perfect on the first try. They were designed to learn, adapt, and endure. The evidence whispers from sites worldwide. That crumbled arch in masonry where the keystone was later redesigned with a lip to prevent slippage, those Roman piers showing 3 distinct phases of reinforcement. These silent teachers remind us that engineering isn't about avoiding failure, it's about listening to it. The bridges that still stand today aren't just monuments to success, they're monuments to every collapse that made them possible. Monsoons, blizzards, scorching sun, ancient bridges didn't just endure these forces, they turned them into collaborators. Take Sri Lanka's moonstone bridges, their curved aprons designed like inverted umbrellas. During torrential rains, the arches didn't just let water pass, they accelerated it, creating a self-cleaning current that swept debris downstream. Meanwhile, in Scotland's Highlands, drystone bridges survived centuries of freeze-thaw cycles thanks to a clever trick: loosely stacked stones with gaps just wide enough to let ice expand without cracking. These weren't mistakes, they were pressure valves allowing the structure to breathe with the seasons. The Anping Bridge in China took water management to poetic heights. Stretching across an estuary, its stone piers were precisely spaced to harness tidal rhythms. As the tide rose, swirling currents scoured silt from the foundations, while receding waters carried away the debris. Modern engineers call this tidal flushing, but 12th century builders achieved it by observing how egrets waded, placing piers where birds found the firmest footing. Nearby, the Loyang Bridge went further, cultivating oysters on its piers. The mollusk secretions acted as natural cement, their shells reinforcing the structure against waves. This wasn't just construction, it was biomimicry before the term existed. Adaptation extended beyond water. In the Andes, builders alternated dense granite with lighter sandstone in their bridges. The granite resisted crushing forces from traffic above, while the porous sandstone absorbed seismic shocks from below. During earthquakes, these soft story layers would microfracture harmlessly, protecting the overall structure, a technique rediscovered by modern earthquake engineers only in the 1980s. Similarly, Japanese timber bridges incorporated shinbashera, central pillars left slightly loose in their sockets. When typhoon winds hit, the pillars swayed like pendulums, dissipating energy that would otherwise topple rigid designs. Microclimates became secret weapons. Persian desert bridges used wind scoops to funnel breezes across their decks, cooling expansion-prone materials by day. In alpine regions, builders angled bridges to maximize snowmelt runoff, preventing ice dams from forming at critical joints. Even sunlight was harnessed strategically. The concave profiles of some Roman bridges concentrated solar heat on mortar joints in winter, preventing freeze damage through passive thermal regulation. These structures didn't just survive their environments, they learned from them. The bridges still standing today whisper a radical truth. Resilience isn't about resisting change, but redesigning for it. While modern infrastructure often fights nature with brute force, these ancient engineers asked a simpler question: how can we make nature work for us? Their answer lies in every stone that shifts but doesn't fall, every joint that tightens when stressed, every bridge that didn't just endure time but danced with it. To understand why so many ancient bridges still stand today, we must look beyond the stones and ropes. We must listen to the prayers whispered into their foundations. Across cultures, bridges weren't merely crossings. They were thresholds between worlds, their construction steeped in rituals that blended the sacred with the structural. The Mayan Sakpiab, those raised white roads winding through jungles, weren't just highways, they were Yaxchilcab, or first trees of the world, believed to mirror celestial pathways to the underworld. Builders aligned these causeways with Venus's cycles, embedding astronomical precision into the very fabric of their engineering. The result, structures that weren't just physically sound but cosmologically anchored. their alignment ensuring communal reverence translated into meticulous maintenance for centuries. In Nepal, the process of bridge building began with a puja ceremony, where priests buried offerings of grain and herbs beneath abutments, superstition. Perhaps, but modern soil analysis reveals these organic deposits acted as natural desiccants, absorbing moisture that might otherwise weaken foundations. Similarly, Roman engineers sacrificed lambs before laying keystones, sprinkling blood on the mortar. Today, we dismiss this as mere ritual, until spectrographs detected iron-rich hemoglobin in ancient mortar samples, a component that may have inadvertently strengthened the binder through chemical reactions. Faith didn't just inspire care, it engineered resilience. The spiritual dimensions often dictated practical choices. Japanese hashi bridges were traditionally painted vermilion, a color believed to repel evil spirits. Coincidentally, the pigment contained cinnabar, a mercury compound that deterred wood-boring insects. In Scandinavia, runes carved into bridge timbers weren't just blessings. They marked stress points where extra reinforcement was needed, turning incantations into invisible instruction manuals. Even the orientation of bridges held meaning. The Incas' rope bridges often spanned east-west, aligning with Inti, the sun god, but also ensuring morning sunlight dried dew-laden fibers, preventing rot. Perhaps the most profound intersection of faith and physics lay in the rituals of precision. In Bhutan, monks still chant geometric ratios while weaving cane bridges, their melodies pacing the weaver's movements to maintain even tension. In Armenia, cathedral builders who later constructed bridges used a holy compass, said to be guided by angels. Deconstructing the tool reveals it encoded the golden ratio, ensuring arches distributed weight optimally. These weren't just tools, they were tactile prayers, transforming divine proportions into load-bearing reality. The legacy of these practices lingers in unexpected ways. Modern engineers studying the stability of the 2,000-year-old Pont Saint Martin in Italy found its mortar joints unusually uniform until they discovered medieval guilds had required masons to recite specific psalms while mixing, their rhythmic cadence accidentally timing the perfect stirring interval. Elsewhere, the Maoris' practice of burying a mori stone, a spiritual keystone beneath bridges, may have served a dual purpose. The selected basalt stones, rich in magnetic minerals, subtly aligned with Earth's magnetic field, potentially reducing metal tool corrosion in nearby fittings. What emerges is a revelation. The spiritual care lavished on these bridges didn't just honor the divine, it engineered longevity. When every stone was laid with a blessing, when every beam was carved under chant, craftsmanship became sacramental. The bridges that survived weren't just well built, they were beloved. In an age before structural audits, faith provided the quality control, a reminder that the deepest strength often lies not in materials alone, but in the meaning we embed within them. The story of bridge engineering takes a curious turn when we compare the enduring triumphs of pre-Iron Age builders with their medieval successors. At first glance, the introduction of iron should have revolutionized durability, stronger reinforcements, taller spans, grander visions. Yet the opposite often proved true. Consider the Pont du Gard, that triple-tiered Roman aqueduct still standing proudly after 2 millennia, its mortar-free stones locked together by friction and geometry alone. Now contrast it with the skeletal remains of medieval bridges like England's Old London Bridge, which required constant repairs despite its iron clamps and reinforcements. The difference isn't just in materials, it's in philosophy. Pre-Iron Age builders worked with nature's constraints, turning limitations into advantages. Their arches were low and wide, channeling forces along gentle curves that distributed weight efficiently. Medieval engineers, armed with iron, pushed heights and spans to dramatic new extremes, but at a cost. Taller piers meant greater exposure to wind and water erosion. Iron, though strong, proved a hidden liability. When exposed to moisture, it rusted and expanded, cracking the very masonry it was meant to protect. Spectrographic studies of medieval bridges reveal how iron cramps, intended as reinforcements, often became the starting points for catastrophic fractures. The contrast becomes even starker when examining foundations. Roman bridges like the Pons Fabricius used massive volcanic tuff blocks that resisted water absorption, their weight alone providing stability. Medieval builders, eager to economize, sometimes skimped on foundation depth, relying on iron straps to compensate, a decision that led to spectacular collapses during floods. The ruins of France's Pont d'Avignon tell this tale vividly. Its surviving chapel-topped pier stands only because it was built with Roman-style stonework, while its iron-dependent spans vanished centuries ago. Yet the most telling difference lies in adaptability. Pre-Iron Age bridges moved with their environment. The slight sway of Inca rope bridges dissipated earthquake energy. The porous joints of dry stone arches allowed for thermal expansion. Medieval iron-reinforced structures, rigid and unyielding, often failed under seismic stress or freeze-thaw cycles. The 1347 collapse of Germany's Regensburg Bridge, despite its state-of-the-art iron bracing, demonstrated how technological pride could outpace wisdom. This isn't to say medieval engineers lacked skill. Their vaulted cathedrals prove otherwise, but in bridging they fell victim to a seductive idea that new materials automatically meant better solutions. The Romans never had that illusion. Their bridges survived because they respected stone's natural virtues, its compressive strength, its resistance to fire, its timeless patience against the elements. Iron promised quicker victories, but stone delivered lasting ones. The lesson echoes beyond engineering. In our rush to embrace the new, we sometimes forget that progress isn't just about adding capabilities, it's about understanding trade-offs. Those ancient builders knew something we're still relearning. That true advancement isn't measured in height or speed, but in harmony. Their bridges didn't dominate the landscape, they conversed with it. And while medieval iron has rusted away, those silent stone dialogues endure. The strength of ancient bridges didn't just come from stone, it pulsed through the very fibers of plants and the sinews of animals. Take the Huachuaca Bridge in Peru, a living testament to the power of grass. Every year, communities gather to weave iku grass into thick cables, their hands moving in rhythms passed down since the Inca Empire. This isn't just tradition, it's a masterclass in organic engineering. The dried grass, brittle on its own, becomes something extraordinary when twisted into ropes, its individual weaknesses cancelled out by collective strength. Modern tests show these ropes, though far weaker than steel in raw tension, outperform metal in one critical way: flexibility. When Andean winds whip through the canyon, the bridge sways like a living thing, dispersing energy that would snap rigid steel cables. But grass wasn't the only unsung hero. In ancient Tibet, builders soaked yak hides in fermented barley water, turning them into shock-absorbing pads for cantilevered bridges. The hide's natural collagen, toughened by tannins in the brew, resisted rot while remaining supple enough to cushion seismic shocks. Meanwhile, Japanese engineers discovered that bamboo, hollow yet incredibly tough, could be split and woven into grids that reinforced earthen bridges. The secret lay in bamboo's silica-rich fibers, which stiffened when layered crosswise, creating a natural composite material eerily similar to modern fiberglass. Some of the most ingenious solutions came from the animal kingdom itself. Roman engineers near Pompeii embedded beehives into bridge abutments, not for honey but for climate control. The bees' constant wing beats circulated air, preventing moisture buildup that could weaken mortar. In Mesopotamia, builders stuffed reed bundles with bitumen-soaked wool, creating waterproof caissons that floated foundations into place. Even blood played a role. Mongolian horsemen used oxblood as a binder for gravel, creating a pavement so durable that Genghis Khan's troops crossed rivers on bridges paved with the stuff. What made these materials so effective wasn't just their individual properties, but how they worked together. The Incas' grass ropes were always paired with stone anchors carved with spiral grooves. As tension increased, the ropes settled deeper into these grooves, creating a self-tightening knot no metal clasp could replicate. Similarly, Chinese builders layered sticky rice mortar between bamboo slats, the organic adhesive flexing slightly to accommodate movement while maintaining bond strength. These weren't crude compromises, they were sophisticated material synergies honed through centuries of observation. The real magic of these organic materials lay in their impermanence. Unlike stone, which demands perfection from the start, plant and animal-based components allowed for adaptation. When a hemp rope frayed, it could be rewoven. When a bamboo joint weakened, fresh shoots were ready for harvest. This cyclical renewal built resilience into the very philosophy of these structures, a stark contrast to modern bridges, where a single corroded rebar can spell disaster. The Qswachaka Bridge's annual rebuilding isn't a weakness. It's a dialogue between generations, ensuring knowledge stays as alive as the materials themselves. Today, as engineers grapple with the environmental costs of steel and concrete, these ancient solutions are getting a second look. Laboratories are testing flax fiber composites that mimic Inca grass ropes, while self-healing concrete infused with bacteria echoes Roman B-enhanced mortar. The bridges of the past whisper a provocative idea. Perhaps progress doesn't always mean abandoning nature's toolbox, but learning to wield it with ancient wisdom and modern precision. After all, a blade of grass may seem fragile until thousands are twisted together into something that outlasts empires. Bridges that crumbled tell stories just as vivid as those that still stand, stories of oversight, adaptation, and hard-won wisdom. Take the Hittite pontoon bridge that once spanned the Euphrates. Historical accounts describe its sudden collapse during a military march, plunging soldiers and chariots into the river. Archaeologists later pinpointed the culprit. Timber supports rotted from the inside out, their decay hidden beneath seemingly sturdy bark. This wasn't just bad luck, it was a lesson in material betrayal. The Hittites, it turned out, had felled the trees during peak sap season, when the wood was most susceptible to fungal invasion. Their failure became a cautionary tale whispered across trade routes, teaching later builders to harvest timber in winter, when dormant trees yielded denser, more resistant lumber. The Cretans took this further with a brine-soaking technique that transformed weakness into strength. After a series of bridge collapses exposed timber's vulnerability to shipworms and rot, they began submerging logs in saltwater pits for months. The brine drove out moisture, infused the wood with natural preservatives, and even repelled insects. Ships carrying this seasoned wood reported fewer leaks, and soon bridges followed suit. The remains of a Cretan pier in Como's reveal logs still intact after 3 millennia, their salt-cured fibers defying time. Modern science confirms why the hypersaline environment inhibited bacterial growth, while crystallization within the wood cells added compressive strength. What began as a response to disaster became a cornerstone of maritime engineering. Some failures revealed subtler truths. The remnants of a Zhou dynasty bridge in China show piers spaced too narrowly, creating turbulent eddies that scoured away their own foundations. Later dynasties widened the gaps, but also introduced curved cutwaters wedge-shaped pier extensions that split currents like a bow slicing through waves. These adaptations didn't just fix the problem, they turned water into an ally, using its energy to keep sediment from accumulating. Similarly, the abrupt collapse of a Celtic trestle bridge in Wales exposed the danger of rigid joints. Surviving carvings depict the disaster, with annotations suggesting the builders switched to living hinges, joints wrapped in willow shoots that grew into living roots, allowing controlled movement. The most profound lessons often emerged from cascading failures. When a Mycenaean bridge near Turin's collapsed after heavy rains, investigators found that the real culprit wasn't the water itself, but the soil type beneath the abutments. The original builders had packed the foundations with clay, which expanded when wet, subtly shifting the stones over decades until one final rain triggered the collapse. Subsequent bridges used layered gravel and sand, a natural French drain that redirected water away from critical supports. This insight didn't just save bridges, it shaped entire cities, influencing how civilizations built on floodplains for centuries. These stories of collapse share a common thread. Each disaster forced builders to confront nature's complexities head-on. Where modern engineers might rely on computer models, ancient builders had physical evidence: twisted timbers, fractured stones, and the silent testimony of ruins. Their solutions weren't just technical, they were philosophical. The Cretans didn't just brine wood, they learned to respect timber as a living material with seasonal rhythms. The Jew engineers didn't just space piers differently, they began reading rivers like living texts. The bridges that fell were never truly lost. Their ghosts linger in the structures that followed, in the salt-cured logs of Crete, the willow-bound joints of Wales, the gravel-packed foundations of Greece. Every collapse was a conversation with failure, and every rebuild, a reply written in stone and timber. Today, as modern bridges still succumb to unforeseen stresses, these ancient failures whisper across time. The greatest strength isn't in never falling, but in learning why you fell and building the wisdom into the next attempt. Ancient bridge builders may not have had calculators or computers, but their understanding of mathematics was etched into every stone they laid. Without formal equations, they mastered geometry through observation and intuition, turning sacred ratios into structural superpowers. The Egyptians used the Seismic, a proportional system based on the slope of pyramids, to calculate the ideal angles for bridges crossing the Nile's shifting sands. These weren't arbitrary choices, they were mathematical harmonies disguised as construction rules. When modern engineers analyzed the surviving Nile crossings, they found the Seismic's 7:1 ratio created slopes that minimized erosion while maximizing stability. A balance modern software now confirms as optimal for sandy environments. Half a world away, the Vedic Sulba Sutras, ancient Indian texts, encoded bridge design in verses that blended spiritual philosophy with geometric precision. One stanza describes laying out a bridge foundation using ropes and pegs to form perfect right triangles, ensuring piers aligned with cosmic directions. What seemed like ritual was actually rigorous applied math. The famed bridges of the Gupta Empire followed these sutras, their spans adhering to the Triyugma proportion, 3 parts length to 2 parts height, a ratio that distributed weight so efficiently some spans carried elephants without buckling. Laser scans of these ruins revealed deviations of less than 2% from ideal load-bearing angles, a margin of error that rivals modern city-designed structures. But perhaps the most elegant example lies in the Greek bridges employing the 4-5-3 triangle. At first glance, it's just a simple Pythagorean triplet. Yet when applied to arch construction, this ratio became a recipe for immortality. The shorter side, 3 units, defined the arch's rise. The longer leg, 4 units, set the span's width, and the hypotenuse, 5 units, determined the inward thrust along the curve. This wasn't guesswork. It was physics encoded in numbers. Bridges like the Mycenaean Kazama Bridge still stand today because their stones follow this hidden arithmetic, each block placed at angles that convert crushing weight into graceful equilibrium. The real brilliance was how these mathematical principles traveled, not through textbooks but through myths and metaphors. Norse legends spoke of the Rainbow Bridge Bifrost as a burning arc, its curvature mirroring the optimal parabola for dispersing loads. Chinese builders referenced the dragon's backbone, a poetic term for the catenary curve that made their suspension bridges so resilient. These weren't just stories, they were mnemonic devices, preserving complex engineering concepts in accessible imagery. When a Maori tohunga expert chanted about Tain's embrace while lashing a bridge, he was encoding the ideal tension for rope lashings, a force modern instruments measure at approximately 22 degrees of angular pull. Today's engineers are uncovering even deeper layers of this ancient numeracy. At Turkey's Caravan Bridge, researchers found the keystone's taper follows the Fibonacci sequence, its narrowing proportions matching the natural growth patterns of Nautilus shells. In Peru, the spacing of suspension bridge anchors aligns with prime numbers, a choice that mathematically minimizes harmonic vibration. These discoveries shatter the myth that pre-modern builders relied on trial and error alone. Their intuitive math was anything but random. It was a refined language of shape and force, passed down through generations in songs, stories, and stone. The ultimate test came when MIT engineers recently modeled these ancient designs using finite element analysis. The results were humbling. The Inca's ashlar joints, arranged according to celestial ratios, showed stress distribution comparable to modern expansion joints. Greek corbel arches built with 4-5-3 triangles outperformed steel-reinforced concrete in earthquake simulations. What we're witnessing isn't just coincidence, it's the crystallization of centuries of observational science, refined through cultures that saw numbers not as abstractions, but as living forces woven into the fabric of the world. This mathematical legacy challenges our assumptions about progress. While we've developed calculus and supercomputers, we've also lost something. The holistic understanding that let ancient builders see a bridge not as separate from a river or mountain, but as an equation balancing all three. Their primitive tools, shadow sticks, knotted cords, and aligned stars weren't limitations. They were lenses focusing an intimate knowledge of how reality bends to geometry, and how geometry, in turn, can make stone dance across millennia. The stone arches and woven ropes of ancient bridges did more than span rivers, they stitched together the fabric of civilizations. Consider the Jeju Bridge, that graceful Chinese marvel completed in 605 CE. For 14 centuries, its low-slung arch carried not just travelers, but the lifeblood of commerce, silk, porcelain, and tea flowing along the southern Silk Road. Villages that once struggled in isolation became bustling market towns, their fortunes lifted by reliable passage over the Zio River. Tax records from the Tang dynasty reveal how tolls collected at this single crossing funded schools, granaries, and even flood control projects downstream. The bridge didn't just connect places, it transformed them, turning scattered settlements into nodes of a thriving economic network. This pattern repeated across continents. The Amber Route of Europe, a web of trails linking the Baltic to the Mediterranean, hinged on critical crossings like the Roman bridge at Trier. Here, northern amber met southern spices, while Celtic, Germanic, and Roman cultures exchanged more than goods. Archaeologists have uncovered Venetian glass beads in Scandinavian burial sites and Baltic amber in Egyptian tombs, all tracing back to these indestructible river crossings. The bridges themselves became cultural hybrids. Roman engineering adapted to local stone, Celtic decorative motifs mingling with classical arches, but the social revolution went deeper than trade. In the Andes, the Incas' rope bridges enabled a unique governance model. By taming treacherous gorges, they created a highway system binding together an empire spanning 2,500 miles. Chasqui runners could relay messages from Quito to Cusco in days, while llamas carried quinoa and potatoes between ecological zones. This wasn't just logistics, it was the world's first vertically integrated state, where bridges allowed control over climates from jungle to desert. The Huachuaca Bridge, rebuilt annually through communal labor, doubled as a social glue, reinforcing collective identity with every woven strand. Religious and intellectual currents also flowed across these spans. The ancient Indian bridge at Prayagraj became a pilgrimage nexus where Hindu, Buddhist, and Jain scholars debated philosophy mid-river. Persian chronicles describe how Baghdad's House of Wisdom acquired Greek texts via bridges linking Byzantium to the Islamic world. Even the modest clapper bridges of Cornwall served as storytelling hubs, their broad slabs hosting bards who spread tales from village to village. The true measure of these structures lies in what grew around them. The Roman Ponte Sant'Angelo sprouted chapels and market stalls, evolving into a micro-city. Japan's Kintai-Kaiyo Bridge became the heart of Iwakuni, its 5 wooden arches inspiring festivals, ukiyo-e prints, and even martial art styles adapted for crossing its undulating deck. These weren't just infrastructure projects, they were social ecosystems generating culture as organically as they bore weight. Modern economists might call these multiplier effects, but ancient builders understood them viscerally. When the Khmer Empire constructed bridges across the Tonle Sap, they aligned them with temple sightlines, ensuring commerce and spirituality walked the same path. In Ethiopia, the Ark of the Covenant's legendary journey across the Gudit Stele Bridge turned a simple stone span into a national symbol. The bridges that endured weren't merely strong, they became inseparable from the societies they served, their stones absorbing prayers, their decks echoing with generations of footsteps. This symbiotic relationship holds a mirror to our own era of fragile infrastructure, where modern bridges often isolate. Think of concrete overpasses dividing neighborhoods. These ancient crossings gathered. Their endurance wasn't just physical, it was social, their strength measured not in years but in the civilizations they made possible. The next time you cross a river, pause midway, you're standing on more than engineering. You're walking the same path that carried ideas, faiths, and fortunes across the chasms of history. The bridges of antiquity aren't just relics, they're revolutionaries whispering secrets to modern engineers who have finally stopped to listen. In labs from Zurich to Tokyo, researchers are dissecting ancient techniques with laser scanners and AI, only to make a startling discovery. Our ancestors solved problems we're still grappling with today. Take seismic resilience. When engineers at UC Berkeley studied Peru's Inca masonry, those legendary mortar-free walls, they found the jigsaw-like stones didn't just withstand earthquakes, they danced with them. The slight gaps between blocks allowed microscopic shifts during tremors, dissipating energy like a car's suspension system. This inspired a breakthrough in modern skyscraper design. Flexible joints modeled after Inca stonework now brace high rises in Tokyo and San Francisco, letting buildings sway safely instead of snapping under stress. But it's not just earthquakes. In the Netherlands, civil engineers have resurrected a Roman recipe for waterproof concrete, one that actually strengthens underwater. By mixing volcanic ash and seawater, they've created a marine concrete that self-heals cracks as minerals crystallize within them, mirroring the chemical reactions that kept Roman harbors intact for millennia. Meanwhile, in Switzerland, a team has reverse-engineered the sticky rice mortar of China's Ming Dynasty bridges. Their synthetic version, infused with nanoparticles that mimic rice's organic polymers, is being tested on dams and tunnels where it could reduce maintenance by decades. The collaboration extends beyond materials. Japanese architects studying the Kintai-Kyo Bridge's wooden hinges, designed to flex during typhoons, have developed living joints for modern pedestrian bridges. These timber connections, treated with traditional lacquers, expand and contract with humidity changes, eliminating the rust-prone metal bolts that plague conventional designs. Similarly, the Mayas raised Sakbiob causeways, built with porous limestone to prevent flooding, have inspired permeable pavement systems now combating urban runoff in flood-prone cities like New Orleans. Perhaps the most poetic revival is happening in rope bridge technology. MIT engineers, captivated by the Kwaswachoka Bridge's annual renewal ritual, are experimenting with biofibers that mimic iku grass's properties. Their prototype cables, woven from flax and hemp composites, could one day replace steel in suspension bridges, offering comparable strength with a fraction of the carbon footprint. It's a full-circle moment, ancient sustainability principles informing cutting-edge eco-design. These aren't isolated experiments. Universities from Oxford to Kyoto now offer joint archaeology engineering programs where students analyze medieval bridge ruins with 3D modeling software. At the University of Padua, a team recently used drone scans of Venetian footbridges to optimize modern canal crossings, proving that 500-year-old proportions still outperform contemporary standards. Even space agencies are joining in. NASA, a jet propulsion laboratory, studies Inca terrace drainage systems to design erosion-resistant Martian habitats. The lesson here transcends engineering. These ancient builders worked with nature's constraints rather than against them, turning limitations into innovations. Today's pioneers are realizing that the future of infrastructure might not lie in ever stronger materials, but in smarter geometries, biomimicry, and most surprisingly, humility. The bridges that survived millennia weren't just built, they were negotiated, each stone and fiber a compromise between human ambition and natural law. As we face climate change and resource scarcity, that ancient dialogue is more relevant than ever. The past isn't just inspiring the future, it's rebuilding it, one rediscovered secret at a time. Ironically, the greatest threat to these ancient bridges isn't time or nature, it's us. The Caravan Bridge in Turkey, which has carried travelers since the 9th century BC, now faces an existential dilemma. Every year, thousands of tourists clamber over its stones, their footsteps wearing grooves into surfaces that survived empires. But the real danger lies beneath: groundwater pollution from nearby agriculture seeping into its foundations, and well-meaning restoration teams tempted to stabilize it with modern concrete. This isn't just a conservation challenge, it's a philosophical crossroads. Do we reinforce history with steel rods, or let it stand as it was meant to, pure, unadulterated stone? The debate rages globally. In Greece, engineers monitoring the Arcadico bridge discovered that a 1970s restoration attempt adding mortar to strengthen its dry stone joints actually accelerated erosion by trapping moisture. The original mortar-free design had allowed rainwater to evaporate freely. Now it pools and freezes, cracking the very stones it was meant to save. Similar mistakes haunt China's Jeju Bridge, where a layer of modern sealant applied to protect its ornate carvings trapped humidity underneath, fostering mold that's eating away at reliefs that survived 1,000 years of weather. Yet doing nothing isn't always the answer. Peru's Ashuachaca rope bridge, rebuilt annually for centuries using traditional techniques, nearly vanished when younger generations migrated to cities. Here, preservation meant reviving the ritual itself, funding workshops where elders teach iku grass weaving to teens who'd never held a sickle. The bridge lives not as a frozen artifact, but as a living practice. Meanwhile, in Scotland, climate change has altered rainfall patterns, overwhelming the drainage systems of ancient clapper bridges. Conservationists face a brutal choice: modify the original design with discrete gutters or watch them wash away. The heart of the conflict lies in defining authenticity. Is a bridge still original if its ropes are replaced yearly, as the Inca did? Does inserting stainless steel pins to stabilize the Pont du Gard's crumbling stones erase its Roman soul? Some argue yes, that any modern intervention breaks the chain of craftsmanship. Others counter that these bridges were always evolving, their builders adapting to each collapse and storm. After all, the caravan bridge's current form includes Ottoman-era repairs. Does that make it less Hittite or more human? Technology offers compromises. Laser scanning now allows digital preservation, creating millimeter-perfect 3D models so future generations can study or even reconstruct lost bridges. In Japan, engineers are testing translucent carbon fiber straps that reinforce timber joints invisibly. And at Turkey's Aspendos Bridge, nanotech coatings derived from Roman mortar recipes protect stones without altering their appearance. These solutions walk a tightrope between past and present, honoring ancient ingenuity without freezing it in amber. Perhaps the most profound preservation happens in the mind. When visitors to the Arcadico Bridge kneel to touch stones once placed by Mycenaean hands, they're not just seeing a ruin, they're feeling a conversation across millennia. That connection, more than any mortar or metal, is what keeps these bridges alive. The true challenge isn't just saving the stones, it's ensuring that when we look at them, we still see not relics but teachers. And like all great teachers, their lessons evolve if we're wise enough to listen. Even after centuries of study, ancient bridges guard their deepest secrets like silent sentinels. Consider this puzzling fact: 2 Roman bridges built with identical materials and techniques stand just miles apart. When an earthquake strikes, one crumbles while the other barely trembles. Modern seismologists have scanned both structures down to the atomic level, yet the difference remains elusive. Some speculate it's the soil composition beneath their foundations. Perhaps one sits on bedrock that dampens vibrations, while the other rests on sedimentary layers that amplify them. Others point to nearly imperceptible variations in arch curvature, suggesting certain angles convert seismic energy into harmless harmonic waves. But the truth? It's still written in stones we haven't fully learned to read. Then there's the riddle of the megalithic stones. How did builders at Turkey's Caravan Bridge maneuver 10-ton blocks without wheels or pulleys? Ancient accounts mention singing stones that became lighter when struck at specific frequencies, a legend modern physicists are testing with surprising results. Experiments at MIT show certain resonant vibrations can reduce apparent weight by up to 40% through acoustic levitation principles. Could cultures from the Inca to the Egyptians have harnessed sound as a primitive anti-gravity tool? The theory gains traction when you examine the mysterious cup marks found near quarries worldwide, small depressions that may have held water to amplify standing waves during transport. Some mysteries defy even speculative answers. The bridges of Nan Madol in Micronesia, built from basalt logs weighing up to 50 tons, stand on reefs miles from any quarry. Local oral histories speak of flying canoes carrying the stones, while archaeologists scour the seafloor for lost causeways. More baffling still are the Roman concrete piers that grow stronger in seawater, a phenomenon we've only recently replicated using nano-engineered materials. What precise mix of volcanic ash and marine minerals did first-century builders stumble upon? The original recipe died with its creators, leaving modern chemists to reverse engineer it from fragments. Perhaps the most haunting questions concern the human hands behind these feats. How did illiterate cultures transmit precise engineering standards across generations? The Inca's knotted quipu cords may hold clues. Recent studies suggest some knots encoded structural ratios for bridges, but without a living key to decipher them, we're left guessing. Similarly, the perfect load distribution in Greek corbel arches implies a geometric intuition rivaling modern supercomputers. Did they inherit this knowledge from some lost Bronze Age Newton, or was it hard-won through centuries of collapsed prototypes now buried under silt and myth? These aren't just academic riddles, they're invitations to humility. For all our satellites and sensors, we still can't explain why the Jeju Bridge's thin arches haven't buckled under 14 centuries of traffic, or how Mayan causeways align with constellations we've only recently mapped. Each mystery whispers that ancient engineering wasn't just about materials and math. It was a dialogue with forces we've forgotten how to hear. The stones remain, but the songs that shaped them have faded into time, leaving us to piece together melodies from the echoes they left behind. You don't need an engineering degree or fancy tools to unlock the secrets of ancient bridges. Just grab some everyday materials and let your hands do the learning. Start with a simple sandbox experiment that reveals why trapezoidal shapes dominated pre-Iron Age designs. Pile damp sand into 2 mounds spaced a hand's width apart, then gently lay flat stones across the gap. Notice how wider bases naturally distribute weight outward, preventing collapse. Now try the same with rectangular blocks. See how quickly the structure wobbles without that strategic taper. You've just recreated the foundational principle behind bridges like Greece's Arcadico, where geometry does the heavy lifting. For a deeper dive into arch mechanics, raid your kitchen for uncooked spaghetti and marshmallows. Assemble 3 spaghetti strands into a triangle, using marshmallows as corner connectors. This mimics the tensile strength of rope bridges. Then build an arch by bending spaghetti pieces between 2 bookends, observing how compression forces travel along each curve. The moment you place a keystone, a carefully angled marshmallow at the top, you'll feel the structure snap into stability, mirroring the self-locking magic of Roman aqueducts. Want to test ancient seismic resilience? Construct 2 miniature bridges, one with rigid glue joints, another with interlocking wooden blocks that can shift slightly. Place both on a baking sheet and gently shake it. The flexible model will outlast the rigid one every time, demonstrating why Inca stonework survives earthquakes that topple modern buildings. Even toddlers can grasp this concept by stacking irregular rocks in a creek bed, discovering through play how friction and gravity create unbreakable bonds. The real revelation comes when you scale up. Try weaving a backyard rope bridge using nylon cords and accessible stand-in for iku grass. As you tension the cables, you'll instinctively replicate the Andean songo knot technique, pulling diagonally rather than straight down to create self-tightening anchors. Hang a weighted bucket midway and watch how the catenary curve redistributes load, just as it has on Peru's Huachuca for 600 years. These aren't just science fair projects, they're time machines. When your spaghetti arch holds a soup can or your sandbox corbel withstands a toy truck, you're not just learning physics, you're conversing with Mycenaean masons and Inca weavers across the centuries. The materials have changed, but the joy of solving problems with nothing but creativity and observation, that's eternal. So go ahead, get your hands dirty. Every wobbly first attempt is a tribute to those ancient builders who, like you, started with nothing but curiosity and a pile of stones. Pause right here, yes, you, holding your phone or staring at the screen. Grab a scrap of paper, a napkin, even the back of your hand. Now, imagine you're an ancient engineer standing at the edge of a roaring river, armed with nothing but stone, timber, and sheer ingenuity. Your challenge: sketch a bridge that could last millennia using only what nature provides. No steel, no concrete, no computer models, just the raw materials and observational wisdom of the pre-Iron Age world. Start with the basics: shape. Will you choose an arch like the Romans, channeling weight into graceful curves, or perhaps a cantilever design, stacking stones like the Mycenaeans until they lock into equilibrium? Think about your environment. Is this a mountain pass where earthquakes rumble, demanding flexibility? A floodplain where water will test your foundations? Your materials dictate everything: granite for crushing strength, bamboo for tensile resilience, or maybe woven grass ropes to dance with the wind. Now compare your sketch to history's greatest hits. Did you, like the Inca, opt for interlocking stones that tighten under load? Or did you mimic the Zhou dynasty's upward curving decks, designed to flex like a bowstring during tremors? Maybe you stumbled onto the mistake that led to China's sticky rice mortar, a happy accident of pantry ingredients becoming structural glue. Here's the twist: constraints weren't cages for these builders, they were catalysts. The Incas' lack of metal forced them to master friction. The Romans' volcanic soil became their secret ingredient. Your imaginary bridge, born from imaginary limits, likely holds seeds of real innovation. That's the genius these ancients understood. Necessity isn't just the mother of invention, it's the strict teacher who demands brilliance. So, how does your design hold up? If it's wildly different from historical examples, that's not failure, it's a clue. The bridges that survived weren't built by rule followers, but by problem solvers who saw every limitation as a riddle waiting to be solved. Your sketch, whether crude or elaborate, is part of that same timeless conversation between human creativity and the stubborn laws of physics. And who knows? Maybe your napkin doodle contains the kernel of an idea that could outlast us all. The word primitive often carries an unspoken assumption that older technologies were simple stepping stones to our superior modern methods. But stand beneath the soaring arches of the Pont Saint Martin in Italy, a bridge that has carried ox carts, Roman legions, and now 18 wheel trucks for over 2,000 years. And that assumption crumbles like bad concrete. This isn't just durability, it's a masterclass in material science that humbles modern engineering. The secret lies not in what these builders had, but in how they used it. While we rely on steel's tensile strength, they perfected compression. Where we depend on synthetic adhesives, they harnessed friction and geometry. Their limitations became advantages: stone doesn't rust, timber flexes with seismic waves, and mortar-free joints self-adjust with temperature changes. Consider the common critique that ancient builders lacked precision instruments, yet laser scans of the Pont du Gard reveal stone blocks cut within fractions of a millimeter accuracy, rivaling modern machining. How? They used water levels so sensitive they detected the Earth's curvature, shadow squares that calculated angles by tracking the sun, and plumb bobs weighted with naturally polished stones that hung truer than modern metal ones. Their tools weren't crude, they were exquisitely adapted to their materials. A bronze chisel might seem primitive until you watch a stonemason use it to carve dovetail joints so precise they've survived earthquakes that toppled reinforced concrete buildings. The bias toward modernity becomes even more absurd when examining specific engineering feats. China's Jeju Bridge, completed in 605 CE, uses an open spandrel design that wasn't replicated in the West until the 19th century. Its thin arches shouldn't work by modern calculations, yet they've outlasted thousands of advanced bridges that collapsed under similar loads. The trick: the builders embedded slight asymmetries in the arches, creating stress distributions that computer models now show are ideal for withstanding both static weight and dynamic forces like floods. Then there's the myth of progress in materials. We assume our steel-reinforced concrete is superior to Roman pozzolana mortar, until marine biologists discover that Roman harbor concrete has grown stronger over 2 millennia through ongoing chemical reactions with seawater, a self-healing property our materials can't replicate without nanotechnology. Similarly, modern suspension bridges require constant tension adjustments, while Peru's Huachuca rope bridge stabilizes itself through deliberate, calculated sag, its grass fibers tightening under load like a living organism. This isn't about romanticizing the past. It's about recognizing that engineering excellence isn't linear. The Mycenaeans didn't know about tensile strength equations, but their corbelled bridges distribute weight so efficiently that modern engineers use them to teach load-bearing principles. The Inca never studied seismology, yet their polygonal masonry survives quakes that flatten modern buildings because they intuitively understood energy dispersion. These weren't crude prototypes, they were parallel solutions, different answers to the same eternal questions of physics, discovered through observation rather than calculation. The most damning evidence against the primitive label comes from modern failures. When a team tried to reconstruct a Roman bridge using contemporary tools and materials, their version failed stress tests the original would have passed. The culprit, overconfidence in modern adhesives, led them to neglect the subtle interplay of gravity and friction that made dry stone construction so resilient. Similarly, medieval bridges reinforced with iron often collapsed as the metal corroded and expanded, a flaw absent in earlier mortar-free designs. What we're really confronting is a cultural bias that equates complexity with advancement. The Pantheon's dome used progressively lighter aggregates at higher levels, a weight-saving technique aerospace engineers now mimic with composite materials. The difference: the Romans did it by layering volcanic pumice and tufa by hand, while we need computer-controlled factories. Simple tools don't mean simple thinking. That's why the Pont Saint-Martin still stands while countless modern bridges succumb to progress fatigue, the assumption that newer must be better, even when the evidence groans under the weight of history. The stones of these ancient bridges whisper a humbling truth. Mastery isn't about the era you build in, but the depth of your dialogue with the materials and forces at hand. They challenge us to ask not how far we've come, but how much we might have overlooked in our rush to innovate. Step onto the ancient slabs of Cornwall's tar steps, a prehistoric bridge that feels like walking on the spine of a stone giant. This 40-meter-long clapper bridge, built around 3,000 years ago, consists of massive granite slabs balanced on stone piers without mortar. The Dartmoor rain might slick its surface, but those wide, flat stones have survived countless floods by design. Their low profile lets water wash over them rather than against them. Local legend says the devil himself placed these stones, but the real magic is in their simplicity. Visit at dawn when mist clings to the river Baal, and you'll understand why Bronze Age builders chose this spot. The bedrock beneath creates a natural ford, making the bridge an extension of the landscape itself. Cross continents to Japan's Kintai-Kaiyo, a wooden masterpiece that arches like a cat's back over the Nishiki River. Built in 1673 after a typhoon destroyed its predecessor, this 5-span beauty showcases Edo period ingenuity. Its secret, flexible Kusabi wedge joints that allow the bridge to sway during earthquakes and storms. Spring transforms it into a tunnel of cherry blossoms, but engineers will marvel at the way its central piers are anchored to submerged rocks with ironwood straps that tighten when wet. Pro tip: time your visit for early May, when the annual Reconstruction Festival sees locals re-lashing the decks using traditional tools, a living lesson in timeless craftsmanship. Then there's Turkey's Justinian Bridge, a single arch of honey-colored stone stretching across the Sakarya River since the 6th century. Byzantine engineers built it wide enough for 2 ox carts to pass, a width that still accommodates modern hikers. Notice the triangular cutwaters upstream. These diverted floodwaters while reducing the bridge's weight, a dual-purpose innovation Romans perfected. The real marvel lies beneath your feet. The arch's keystone is offset slightly to the east, compensating for the river's stronger current on the western side. Pack a picnic. The nearby apricot orchards offer perfect vantage points to admire how this bridge mirrors the curve of the distant mountains. Venture to the Andes, where the Huachuca rope bridge sways 200 feet above the Apurimac River. Rebuilt annually by Quechua communities using techniques unchanged since the Inca Empire, this 70-foot span of woven iku grass is a testament to communal knowledge. Walk across its springy surface if you dare, and you'll feel how the hand-twisted cables stretch slightly underfoot, dissipating wind energy. Time your trip for the 2nd week of June, when 4 neighboring villages gather for the 3-day rebuilding ritual, a spectacle of singing, braiding, and shared purpose that turns engineering into a sacred act. Finally, lose yourself in the shadows of Greece's Arcadico Bridge, the oldest still-standing bridge in Europe. Built around 1300 BC as part of a Mycenaean military highway, its corbelled arch has outlasted empires. The stones are unworked, no chisel marks, just strategic placement, and the roadway narrows as it rises, funneling weight downward. Hike the surrounding trails at midday, when sunlight reveals the bridge's hidden alignment. It points toward a distant mountain pass, proving even Bronze Age builders understood the value of sightlines. Each of these bridges offers more than a photo op. They're invitations to time travel. Stand on their stones, and you're not just a visitor, you're the latest participant in a conversation that began millennia ago. The past isn't preserved behind glass here. It's alive under your souls, whispering secrets to those who listen with their feet. As we stand beneath the towering arches of these ancient bridges, their stones weathered but unbroken, we're witnessing more than just engineering. We're seeing a philosophy carved in rock and woven into fiber. The secret to their endurance isn't locked in some lost technology or forgotten supermaterial. It's written in the patient dialogue between builder and nature, where every decision honored the unyielding laws of physics while dancing with the unpredictability of earth and water. Take the Roman engineers who mixed volcanic ash into their mortar. They weren't just making concrete, they were learning to converse with fire mountains, transforming destruction into creation. Or consider the Inca weavers rebuilding their grass bridges year after year, understanding that true strength lies not in resisting change, but in embracing renewal. These bridges challenge our modern obsession with control, where we see rivers as obstacles to conquer with steel and dynamite. Ancient builders saw collaborators, their arches designed not to oppose currents but to guide them. The slight upstream tilt of Turkey's Caravan Bridge doesn't fight the river's flow. It respectfully steps aside, letting water pass with minimal friction. The Maya Sakbiob causeways don't repel floods, they elevate above them, acknowledging seasonal rhythms rather than denying them. This humility before natural forces isn't weakness, it's wisdom written in stone. What's most humbling is realizing how much we've forgotten. Modern engineers armed with supercomputers are only now decoding principles these builders grasped through observation and intuition. The self-healing properties of Roman marine concrete, the earthquake resilience of Inca masonry, the aerodynamic wisdom behind Tibetan yak hide suspension bridges, these weren't happy accidents. They were hard-won understandings born from generations of watching, testing, and sometimes failing. When a medieval bridge collapsed, the next one rose stronger, its lessons etched not in textbooks, but in songs and stories that turned catastrophe into collective memory. The final lesson these bridges teach may be the most vital, that greatness isn't measured in years alone, but in harmony. The Pont du Gard didn't survive because it was the strongest aqueduct ever built. It endures because its creators understood that beauty and function are inseparable partners. Those graceful arches aren't just load-bearing, they're soul-lifting, proving that structures meant to last must nourish both body and spirit. This is why we still pilgrimage to these crossings today, running our hands along stones placed by hands long turned to dust. We're not just admiring engineering, we're touching humanity's timeless conversation with the world. So the next time you cross a modern bridge, pause midway. Feel the vibration of traffic beneath you, watch the river flow, and ask, will this structure inspire awe in 30 years, let alone 3,000? The answer lies not in its steel beams or concrete thickness, but in whether its builders listened as closely to nature's whispers as those ancient artisans did. Those pre-Iron Age bridges still standing today aren't relics, they're mentors, and their most profound lesson is this: true longevity isn't about defying time, but moving with its rhythm. If that idea resonates with you, share your thoughts below. Which of these ancient marvels speaks to you most? And remember to subscribe as we continue uncovering history's hidden dialogues, where every stone has a story waiting